Okay, so when we're solving equations, certain ones, like we've been doing, are relatively simple for us to get our heads around. So this is going slow again. Bear with me. X plus 5. So if I were to think of it as a set of scales, this kind of works because I've got an unknown bag and I've got a weight of 5 and a weight of 10. So the method is to do what? So subtract the 5, which would be like the weights, which would leave me the x there. Need to subtract the 5, so I've got x is 5. So that's simple enough. Okay. However, what we then need to consider is one like g. All right. So G, we've got 4C, right? Plus, what could that mean in terms of weights and fruits? Be more realistic. What are C's? 4 coconuts, all right, I like coconuts. C for coconut. 4 coconuts plus 7 weights on one side, and then I've got 2 coconuts plus a weight. Right. Now, let me just, before you start jumping in, sometimes the method that we have for the basics starts becoming a little bit of an issue when numbers become a little bit more abstract and they don't actually mean anything in real terms. So it's difficult when we do algebra to use things like fruit, things like that, because if I say A is for apples, people start believing that A has to be something that begins with A. All right? Also, apples are a real thing, and it makes no sense to have -3 apples. All right? No sense whatsoever. Doesn't exist. However, we have to apply the same methods that we've got and just accept that negative numbers can happen. Okay? They are just as normal as positive numbers, but they might not apply in a real world situation when we're talking apples and carrots and coconuts and things. So, Aidan.
For G is 2C minus 1.
Is it 2C minus 1?
Yeah, minus 1.
All right, let's do minus 1. Might be a bit better. Okay, so what's the process first? First step. Anything you like. Desmond. -1 from each side. I can -1 from each side. But let's just have a look at something. If I were to -1 from each side, I'm allowed to do that, Desmond. Absolutely no problem. Whether it's what I want to do is a different matter. If I -1 from each side, what do I end up with? I end up with 4 C's
Plus 6
equals
2C minus 2.
okay. So I'm no better off than I was before. Because I'm at -1 and I subtract another. And that's the thing, that's where the -1 weight doesn't make any sense. However, what we now need to think of it is, well, instead of just thinking about lifting off weights off the scale, what I'm actually doing, when I lift off a weight, I'm actually getting rid of the fact that the weight's there at all. So we're going to still use that process of eliminating things, but we can't necessarily apply it as lifting a physical object off the scales. But I can get rid of things. Now in maths, there's always an operation that undoes another operation. So what is the opposite of multiplication? Division. If I want to get rid of a multiplication, I do a division. If I want to get rid of a subtraction, I do an addition. Steph, what do you want to say? You can have a debt, yeah. But what I would say is even then, like the currency one, yeah, but what about the minus 1? And you could say, like, on one side I subtract $1. So, but I think you're right, Desmond, I want to get rid of the negative 1, don't I? But instead of subtracting another 1, I need to add 1. So to get rid of subtract 1, I need to add 1 to it. So all the ones I've done before, I've subtracted, got rid of stuff. But now I can add something. But I still need to add on this side. So now I've got 4c's plus 8. Now, I still probably wouldn't have done that first. But I can. It's fine. I wouldn't have chosen to done that first, but it is fine. I want you to be very clear that there is nothing wrong at this stage. I might have just added an extra step to my working. Ava? See, that's what I would have done. Yeah, so if I'd have not added the 1, if I'd have minus 7 instead, I'd have ended up with 4c equals 2c minus 8. Now that's the same thing as doing this step and then subtracting 8 anyway. I get to the same point, but I could have gone there in one step rather than 2. Yeah. Is that a problem? No, it's not a problem. As long as I don't do something I'm not allowed to do. All right? Now, the next step I think is quite obvious, which is... So we...
Subtract 2c.
I could divide by 2 actually, but actually easier would be to subtract the 2c's, which I'm left with 2c's equals minus 8. I don't have 8 c's. I have 8, negative 8. So now if I divide by 2, if 2 c's make negative 8, 1 c must be negative 4. Okay? So I'm using exactly the same process, but negatives are not a problem. Now, just to say to you, I mean, this is the next bit is why I really like my maths, is because I know if I'm right. Because I started with 4c plus 7 equals 2c minus 1, and I know that now c is minus 4, so actually I can do 4 times minus 4 plus 7, and I can do 2 times minus 4 minus 1, and I should get the same answer because they're equal. So that would be negative 16 plus 7 is negative 9. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. Negative minus 1 is negative 9. I am happy that they are equal. So my equal sign, I've done. So I'm happy. That's my check. I would do that in my head if I was unsure. Okay? So it always gets me, sometimes people in a test, for instance, they get an answer and I'm like, well, that's clearly wrong. Well, the problem is they've made one silly mistake and they'll go back and go, that's not, that was just a silly mistake. I've just done 1 times 1 is 2. Right? But the answer they got, if you put that back in, they would know it's wrong. So just check your answer, even if it's mental. Right, I think Odin came to me at the end of last lesson with a question saying there's 2 possible answers. So I want to show you, before you get on with the others, let's have a look at one that's like this. Y divided by 4 plus 7 equals 2. So this is question M. All right. You figured it out. Okay. Odin, what did you do wrong? Not what's the right answer, what did you do wrong? So you think minusing 7 off both sides first is wrong? That's not wrong, is it? I think you looked at your 2 options and picked the wrong one that was wrong. And in this case, 2 wrongs don't make a right. They make it doubly wrong.
He wasn't timesing them together.
Right, so this is where we've got to think order in operations. We can only get rid of things in the correct order. All right? So I have to think, what happens to y? What was the first thing that happened to y? Right, so if I think of the language of it, what I would do, if I was going to substitute into y, I would do y, then divide by 4, and get an answer, right? Remember we were doing the trick stuff. Think of a number, divide by 4, add 7, get 2. Right? So in your head, if I said to you, think of a number, divide it by 4, so you'd be clever and go, you know, pick something that divides by 4. Right? So I do 16, I divide by 4, and I get an answer, yeah? Then I add 7. Does that make sense? So when I'm trying to solve for y, what I'm actually trying to do is try to figure out the steps on the way back. And that's another way to think of it with the balance. So the first thing I have to get rid of is the last thing that was added on to the scales, if you like. So the last thing that was added on to the side that's got the y is the 7. So that's the first thing I have to get rid of. Does that make sense? Right? And the only way I can really explain this to you is you have to read it in English or in French or in Spanish or whatever you choose to read it in. But you have to read that in a normal language, not a maths language. So I take y, I divide by 4, then I add 7, I get, so first of all I have to take the 7 off and figure out what I got before I added 7 on. So that means I get rid of the plus 7, which is what we were doing with the scales. So that means I only have the y divided by 4 bit. So what was that before I added 7? Well, it's the answer also before I added 7, which must be -5. Now I've got a number, I divide it by 4 to get -5. How do I undo my divide by 4? Multiply by 4. So I'm going to times by 4 both sides, and I get the times by 4 gets rid of the divide by 4, and I'm left with y equals -20. Okay? And the same way, I don't think this one's in the book, but let's say I have 3 lots of x plus 2 equals 15. I'll make it easy. This is an easy one to think about. I could do it in a couple of ways. I can expand the brackets and deal with it first, which we did before. Or I could think of it as, I think of x, then I add 2 and I get an answer. Then I multiply that answer by 3 and I get 15. So the first thing I have to undo is the times 3. So I have to divide by 3 first, not at the end this time. That gets rid of the 3, leaving me with, what was that before I times by 3? And the answer is 5. Now I subtract 2, and I get x must have equaled 3. So that's the thing. As they get more complex, where they start dealing with negatives and divisions and things like that, it's not so easy to think of it as sets of scales, okay? But you have to stick with the method and you have to think of the order of operations, okay? Any questions before? Okay, well, they're there. Carry on then with that exercise. If you are done, you can carry on through all the way through. Do all of them. If you're done with the whole thing, you can go on to the creating puzzles and equations and things. And go on to practice 6, no problem. But make sure you are 100% happy with all of practice 5. 100% happy. Okay? Let me know if you have any questions. Which is, what can and can't be done? Now, some of you are saying to me, well, can I do this first? And I say, no, you wouldn't do that. But I need to clarify, and it's not that you can't do what you're saying, it's that after you've done what you're going to do, what you write down as the result is incorrect. So, Aidan, just read that question you're doing for me.
2t divided by 7 minus 10 equals negative 2t plus 4.
Okay. Now, what Aidan said to me was, because of one we talked about before, Desmond, I hope you pay attention, because it's much more important than what you're currently trying to discuss with Cameron. He said about, can I multiply by 7 first? And can you see why you would want to? Oh, yeah. Can you? Why? Odin, can you hear him? You're right next to him. No, you can't hear him.
I can't hear him.
No, I can't. I'm going to go. I think what he's trying to say is, lip reading, it's the 2t divided by the 7. So Aidan wants to get rid of that. All right? So what he's saying is we should multiply by the 7. Now, that's fine. You can multiply by 7. All right? But it's what happens if you multiply by 7 that matters. Now, one thing I did like that you were doing is, if I want to multiply by 7, remember the scales. What does 7 multiplied by something mean you end up with? What the word? 7 lots of all of that. So if I want to multiply one side of the scales by 7, I'm going to get 7 lots of everything on it. Okay? That makes sense? So I did like when you were putting brackets around things. Times it by 7. And what do I have to do over here? Times it by 7. Everything. Now, what does that then do? Well, that puts us in the bracket situation. So, Desmond, what would that do on the left?
On the left, 7 times divided by 7 would cancel out.
And that would leave me with 2t. But also, which is what a lot of people don't do, is the... Very slow. I have to do that one as well, so I end up with minus 70. And that's the bit, Liam. If you're cold, you should have worn something rather than just a vest. Okay? That's the bit people get wrong. They forget that if I multiply by 7, I'm also multiplying the 10 as well. All right? And that's why I say I wouldn't do that. I would have added the 10 first to get it out of the way. But if I choose to multiply by 7 first, that's absolutely fine. But I need to make sure that I do everything. And on this side, we end up with minus 14t plus 28. So if I do that, fine, I can multiply by 7. But I have to make sure everything is like that. Make sense, Caden? All right? Try and stay focused. So now I can sort things out. Now, that might not have been the way I would have chosen to do it, but it's fine. So, Karen, what would you do next?
I subtract negative 14t.
And how do I subtract negative 14t?
And then add it.
Yeah, no, what you were saying is fine, but subtracting negative is the same as adding. Yeah, so I'm going to add 14t to that side, and I get
16t
equals. Now I'm going to add the 70. I get 16t equals 98. Now I have to divide by 16. And I get 1t is?
No, it's 49 over 8.
98 divided by 16, 49 over 8. Is that it? Simple as it goes? Is that it? Already done it.
Oh, no. Yeah, 49.
6.125. Okay. So what I would always say is when I end up, especially at the moment, decimals are absolutely fine. Fractions are fine as an answer. But just be careful. If you get a decimal in an exercise like we're doing, just double check. Because quite often the results I'm asking you for are whole numbers. But can you see how, so like with you, Odin, when you were picking, do you understand now when you went multiply by something first, your answer was wrong because you didn't do the second bit, right? There are lots of options for what to do. There's no rule that says I have to always add the 10 on first. But the rule is, if I do something to one side, girls, I have to do it to everything and to both sides. Everything on both sides. All right? So just be very careful. All right? Any final questions on that? Okay. Now before you pack up, because I've still got a couple of minutes, slam your book down as much as you like, Drew. Now I'll stop.